Word, so please avoid any violated content. Jack said. Night in the valley was quiet like a held breath. Tom stood on his wooden porch, listening to the soft hum of crickets and the slow rustle of leaves. He had lived alone here for years, caring for his small farm, fixing broken fences, and watching the seasons turn. The stars above were clear and bright. He could name some of them from memory. Old lessons from a school teacher who loved the sky. Tom liked the silence. It felt honest. It felt steady. It felt safe. Then the sky split. A white line flashed across the darkness like a whip of light, cutting from one edge of the horizon to the other. It wasn't a falling star. It was thicker, brighter, and terrifyingly close. There was a heavy sound that came a few seconds later, as if the air itself had been punched. Tom's breath caught. The light vanished behind the ridge beyond his field, and a dull boom rolled through the valley. Birds burst from the treetops. Dogs barked far away. The crickets stopped. Smoke started to rise. Thin and gray, from the direction of the forest, Tom stared, his heart beating hard in his chest. Meteor, plane, he had no idea. He slid on his boots without thinking. He took his flashlight, a small first aid pouch he kept by the door, and his old canvas jacket. He did not make a plan. He only knew someone might need help. He crossed the field fast, his steps heavy with dew. The ground smelled like grass and dirt, simple and familiar. At the fence line, he swung his leg over the top wire and dropped onto the path that led into the trees. The forest swallowed the starlight, so he clicked on the flashlight. The beam made a bright tunnel through the dark, showing roots, stones, and little clouds of breath in the cool air. As he moved deeper, the quiet changed. The night sounds did not return to normal. Instead, there was a low humming in the distance, like a tired engine or a deep, slow horn. Tom paused and listened. The humming pulsed once, twice, then faded. The wind carried the smell of hot metal and something sharp and strange, not like any fuel he knew. He kept going. He did not run, but he did not waste time. The trail bent and climbed. Branches scratched his sleeves. Somewhere above him, a tree creaked and dropped a twig that tapped his shoulder and bounced away. The smoke grew thicker the closer he came to the ridge. His flashlight beam picked up flakes of ash drifting like tiny gray insects. He coughed and tied his bandana over his nose and mouth. He did not turn around. He told himself, just a little. Farther, when he reached the ridge, he saw a glow through the trees, soft, unsteady, and not the warm color of a campfire. It flickered blue-white with thin fingers of green. Tom clicked off his light so he could see it better. Moonlight painted the trunks silver as he moved carefully between them. The ground sloped down into a small hollow, a place where rainwater gathered in spring. The glow came from there. He stepped out from behind a thick pine and stopped. In the hollow lay a shape that did not belong to earth. It was partly buried in churned dirt and torn grass, as if it had hit the ground and slid to a stop. The shape was smooth and curved like a river stone, but it was made of a metal Tom could not recognize. It was not shiny like a car. It looked soft somehow, with gentle lines and a surface that drank the light and then gave it back in ripples. Symbols shifted along its skin-thin marks that moved and faded, like a heartbeat written as light. Tom stood at the edge of the hollow and let his eyes adjust. He listened. The glow came from narrow seams along the metal, and the light grew, brighter, then softer, like breathing. The humming returned for a moment, a deep tone that pressed on his chest and then lifted away. He felt a band of fear around his ribs, but he also felt something else, a strong pull, like a hand on his sleeve. Someone might be inside. He slid down the slope, his boots sending little slides of dirt ahead of him. The air near the object was warmer and carried that sharp scent again. Up close, he saw a long line along the side, like a wound in the metal. The line popped and hissed quietly, releasing thin steam. Behind it, in a darker area like a shadowed doorway, he saw movement. A shape. He froze. He remembered all the advice he had ever heard about accidents. Do not rush in. Check for danger. Listen first. A sound slipped out of the shadow, barely a sound at all, just a small, thin cry, like a word trying to be born. Tom felt his fear change into a simple decision. Someone needed him. He turned his flashlight back on and held it low so the beam would not blind whoever was inside. "Hello," he said, voice steady but soft. "I'm here to help. I don't want to hurt you." A hand appeared in the doorway, and Tom's breath caught again. The hand looked almost human. It had 5 long fingers, fine and careful, with a faint shimmer, like moonlight trapped under skin. The fingers curled around the edge and held on, as if the person needed to steady themselves. Tom moved closer, step by step. "It's okay," he said. "I'll be slow." He crouched beside the opening and angled the light toward the ground. He did not want to scare whoever was there. The beam showed a figure leaning inside the craft. He could see a shoulder, a bent knee, and part of a face, smooth cheek, high brow, and eyes that were too bright for the dark. The eyes reflected his light and the pale glow from the seams in the metal. The figure tried to lift itself and made that thin, small sound again. Tom held up his empty hand, palm open. "I'm Tom," he said. "I live down the valley. I have bandages. I can help." The figure hesitated. The eyes turned toward his face, studying him. The features were calm and fine, not like anything Tom had seen except in paintings of people who never existed. The person did not speak his words, but something in the face softened. The figure shifted again, and now Tom saw it, a dark patch on the side of the uniform, a torn place where light caught on wetness. The person was hurt. Tom worked gently. He took the strap of his first aid pouch off his shoulder and set it on the ground. He touched the edge of the doorway. The metal was warm, almost like skin. He looked into the figure's eyes and pointed to the kit, then to the torn place in the uniform, then to himself. He said, "Help. I want to help." He waited, slowly. The injured person nodded. It was a small, tired nod, but it was clear. Tom felt something loosen inside his chest. He spoke again, even though he knew the words might not be understood. "You are not alone," he said. "We'll fix what we can." He used his pocket knife to cut the fabric round the wound, careful to keep his hand steady. He kept the light low and warm in his other hand. The air from the opening smelled like metal and rain. He pulled a clean cloth from the pouch and pressed it to the bleeding area with firm, even pressure. The figure tensed but did not pull away. Tom counted slow breaths in his head. 1, 2, 3, 4. He checked the cloth. It reddened, but not too fast. He pressed again, steady and calm. He looked up. The eyes were on him, bright and focused. There was surprise in them. There was also trust, or the beginning of it. Tom nodded once, as if to say, "Yes, I'm still here." He wrapped a bandage round the cloth and tied it neatly. He kept the knot off to the side in case the person needed to lie down. He had done this for animals on the farm. He had done it for himself when he cut his hand on a fence wire. He did it now with the same careful care outside. A breeze moved the leaves and carried a cool touch across the back of his neck. The seams in the metal glowed softer now, and the humming faded to a comfortable whisper. The injured figure tried a word. It came out rough and unsure, but it sounded like, "Safe?" Tom gave a small smile. He did not want to promise too much. "Safer," he said, "for now." He sat back on his heels and looked around the hollow. The night felt different. It wasn't just the strange craft or the soft lights. It was the feeling that the world had stretched a little wider, and he had stepped into the new space without breaking. He had not thought of courage when he left his house. He had thought of help. Maybe they were the same thing when no one else was there to act. He pulled off his jacket and folded it into a makeshift pillow. He slid it beneath the figure's head. The eyes closed for a moment, then opened again, watching him closely. The mouth formed a quieter word. It sounded like a name, soft and musical, but he could not catch it. He nodded anyway, letting the person know he was listening. Tom checked the bandage one more time. The bleeding had slowed. He breathed out. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, restless and curious, above the trees. The stars still shone, but they seemed farther away than before. as if they were giving space to what lay in the hollow. He turned down his flashlight to the lowest, setting and rested his hand on the cool ground. He spoke in a calm voice, simple words, simple promises. "I'll stay," he said. "I'll stay until morning. You're not alone." The eyes softened again, and the figure gave a very small nod. The glow along the metal faded to a gentle pulse, like a steady heartbeat in the dark. Tom sat beside the doorway and kept his watch, not knowing that this quiet moment would change the shape of his life, and maybe more than his life, in the days to come. Jack said. The night in the hollow grew colder, but Tom stayed awake. The soft glow from the strange craft painted the trees in pale colors, and the quiet was broken only by the slow breathing of the injured figure inside. Every now and then, she shifted slightly, wincing as the bandage pressed against her wound. Tom could tell she was in pain, but she was too tired to make a sound. When the first thin light of dawn touched the tops of the trees, Tom stood and stretched his back. His legs were stiff from sitting on the hard ground all night. He took a sip from his water bottle, then knelt near the opening of the craft. The alien woman's eyes were open now, watching him closely. She studied his face as if trying to remember it. Her gaze was steady, not fearful, but curious. Tom pointed to himself and said slowly, "Tom." He tapped his chest to make the meaning clear. She blinked once, then made a sound soft, almost like Luma. Tom repeated it carefully. "Luma." Her eyes brightened just slightly, and she gave a tiny nod. It seemed he had said it correctly. The morning air was cool, and Tom knew they couldn't stay here for long. The smoke from the crash had faded, but it was possible others might have seen it. If this craft had enemies, they might already be searching. Tom didn't understand why he believed that so strongly, but something about Luma's alert eyes told him it was true. He pointed toward the bandage on her side, then made a gesture of walking away from the crash site. "We move," he said simply. He used both hands to mimic carrying something. Luma tilted her head as if she was translating his meaning in her mind. After a pause, she gave another small nod. Tom stepped closer, offering his hands. She hesitated, then reached out. Her fingers were cool but strong, and he noticed again the faint shimmer under her skin, like a pearl reflecting light. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled. Without a second thought, Tom crouched and lifted her gently into his arms. She was lighter than he expected. Her uniform felt smooth, almost silky, but stronger than any fabric he knew. She wrapped one arm loosely around his neck, careful not to put too much weight on him. Though he didn't mind, as they moved up the slope, Tom could feel her eyes, watching the forest, alert to every sound. The forest was waking up. Birds called from the branches. The air smelled of damp earth and leaves. Somewhere far off, a stream trickled over stones. Tom's boots sank slightly into the soft ground as he made his way toward a path he knew, a small, hidden trail that led deeper into the hills. After a while, Luma tapped his shoulder. He stopped and looked at her. She raised her hand and pointed to the sky. Tom followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing but pale morning clouds. Then, faintly, he heard a deep, distant hum, lower than the one her craft had made. It was moving, slow but steady, somewhere high above. Luma's eyes darkened with concern. She spoke a few short words in her own language, sharp and clipped, then shook her head. Tom didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough, whoever was making that sound. They were not friends. They kept moving. Tom's muscles began to ache, but he didn't slow down. When they reached a thick patch of undergrowth, he set Luma down gently against a fallen log. She took a moment to catch her breath, then, to Tom's surprise, she reached toward his chest. Pressing her palm lightly against it, she looked into his eyes and said something softly, slowly, as if she wanted him to understand the feeling behind the words, even if he couldn't grasp their meaning. Tom had no idea what the sentence meant, but he knew she was trying to thank him. He gave her a small smile. "We're not done yet," he said. "We need to get you somewhere safe." They continued along the narrow trail until the trees grew thicker, their branches weaving together to block much of the light here. The air felt cooler and the forest quieter. This was good. It meant the sound from above would be harder to track. But Tom knew this place wasn't safe forever. If the craft had enemies, they would be looking for energy signals, broken metal, or any sign of life. He had to get Luma away from the area entirely. After about an hour, they reached a small clearing with a large rock overhang. Tom set Luma down in the shade. He unrolled his jacket again for her to sit on and handed her his water bottle. She looked at it curiously at first, then copied his movement, unscrewing the cap and taking a careful sip. She coughed softly, then tried again. Tom opened his first aid pouch and checked the bandage. The bleeding had slowed, but the wound still looked deep. He poured a bit of water on the cloth to clean it, then wrapped a fresh strip of bandage around her waist. She stayed still as he worked, watching his hands with interest. Finally, she spoke again, trying English this time. "Help you." The words were rough, but the effort was clear. Tom shook his head lightly. "No, you rest. I help you?" Her brow furrowed as she thought. She touched the bandage and then pointed toward the sky again. "They come." Tom understood that part perfectly. "Yes," he said quietly. "Then we hide." She looked at him for a long moment, as if measuring his resolve. Finally, she nodded. They rested for a while in the shade, neither speaking much. The forest around them seemed peaceful again, but Tom knew that was only on the surface. Every sound a snapping twig, a gust of wind through the leaves made Luma glance sharply in that direction. Her instincts told him she was used to danger. When the sun climbed higher, Tom knew they had to move again. There was a place farther into the hills, a series of small caves he had explored years ago. Few people knew about them, and they would make a good hiding place until he could figure out what to do. Next, he helped Luma to her feet, supporting her with one arm. The path ahead was steeper now, and Tom's breathing grew heavier as they climbed. Luma tried to walk more on her own, not wanting to slow him down. But every few steps she leaned into him for balance. They reached the base of a rocky hill, where a narrow path wound upward between boulders. Tom led her carefully, testing each step before helping her follow. The higher they climbed, the more of the valley they could see behind them. Smoke from the crash site was almost gone now, but Tom thought he saw a flash of movement in the distant trees. They reached the mouth of the first cave just as the sun began to dip behind the ridge. The air inside was cool and smelled of stone and earth. Tom guided Luma to a flat area at the back and helped her sit down. She looked around, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Then she turned to him and spoke, her voice quieter than before. "Safe now." Tom looked toward the cave entrance. He could still hear the faint hum in the distance, but it was farther away. "For now," he said honestly. Luma seemed to accept that. She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. Tom sat nearby, watching the entrance, alert to every sound. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't leave her alone in this fight, somehow. In the space of a single night, her safety had become his mission, and no matter who was searching for her, Tom was ready to stand in their way. Ticking clock, Tom sat near the entrance, his back against the rock, watching the forest below. Luma rested on the folded jacket, her eyes closed, breathing slow but not yet steady. The pale shimmer of her skin caught the last light of the setting sun as it slipped through the cave mouth. For a while, neither spoke. Tom's mind worked quietly, going over the last day. He still wasn't sure what had pulled him toward the crash site in the first place, only that he couldn't have stayed away. He remembered her face when he first touched the wound, surprised, but not afraid. That moment had told him something important, whoever she was. She trusted courage more than words. Luma stirred and opened her eyes. She studied him for a long moment, as if reading his thoughts. Then she reached toward the small pouch at her waist. Tom leaned forward, worried she might strain herself, but she shook her head gently. From the pouch, she pulled out a thin, flat object no bigger than his palm. It glowed faintly when she touched it, and lines of light shifted across its surface. Like flowing water dots, she held it between them and spoke softly. "Help a talk." Tom frowned at first, not understanding, But then the object projected a faint shimmer into the air. A small sphere of light. Symbols danced inside it, some like her glowing marks on the ship, others slowly shifting into English letters. Tom's eyes widened. Translator, he guessed. Luma nodded. She tapped the sphere again, and a gentle voice spoke from it, not quite human, but clear enough. We may understand each other better now, it said in a calm, even tone. Tom let out a slow breath. That's incredible. Luma's mouth curved slightly. Your words will still be strange to me, she said through the device. But I will try. With this new bridge, Tom began to ask questions. Who attacked you? He said. Her expression darkened. Hunters, she said. Not of food, of people. My ship carried something they wanted, something dangerous to them. She placed her hand over the wound. They fired on us before I could hide it. I escaped. But they will keep searching until they find me or what I carry. Tom looked toward the forest. The faint hum they'd heard earlier still lingered in his memory. And you think they tracked your ship here? Yes, she said simply. They can follow the energy. But she hesitated, her eyes narrowing. When you touched the wound, the shard inside, it stopped sending its signal. You may have saved us both without knowing it. Tom didn't reply right away. The thought that his quick action might have made such a difference left him feeling both proud and uneasy. Then we just have to stay ahead of them, he said finally. Luma tilted her head. You speak as if you were part of this now. Tom gave a half smile. I guess I am. They rested a little longer, but Luma's alert glances toward the cave entrance told Tom she still felt unsafe. As night settled fully, the forest outside changed its voice-soft rustles. The occasional call of a night bird, and once, a far-off snapping sound that made both of them go still. Tom lowered his voice. I know a way deeper into the hills. There's a place with more caves, hidden ones. We can move before sunrise. Luma nodded. Better to move before they come close. They both tried to sleep in shifts. Tom dozed lightly, waking at every small noise. Luma sat quietly during her watch, eyes glowing faintly in the dark, listening to the night as if it spoke a language only she could hear. When the first gray light touched the cave mouth, Tom woke her with a gentle tap on the arm. They packed what little they had, his water bottle, the first aid pouch, and her small translator. Tom helped her to her feet, and they stepped carefully out into the damp morning air. The path uphill was narrow, lined with moss-covered stones. Tom walked ahead, clearing branches and testing the ground before letting Luma step forward. She moved slowly, but with determination. The translator hung from a cord around her neck, catching bits of light as they walked, halfway up the slope. Luma froze. Tom turned to see her staring into the trees below. What is it? He whispered. She lifted her hand and pointed. Through the trunks. Tom saw it, a faint shimmer moving between the shadows, almost like heat rising off asphalt. It shifted shape as it moved, not quite solid, not quite invisible. They are here, Luma said quietly. Tom's pulse quickened. Then we keep moving. They pushed harder up the hill, the shimmer below them weaving closer. It didn't move fast, but it didn't stop either. By the time they reached the top, Tom's shirt was damp with sweat. The hidden caves were just beyond a cluster of tall pines. Tom led her into the narrow entrance of one, forcing them to squeeze sideways between stone walls before it opened into a wide, dry chamber. Light filtered in from small cracks above, and the air smelled faintly of pine needles. This should hide us better, Tom said, catching his breath. Luma lowered herself onto a flat rock and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she fixed him with a steady look. You did not have to help me. Your kind does not know mine. And yet, she paused, the faintest smile touching her lips. You carried me through your world as if it was your duty. Tom shrugged lightly. Maybe it is. We're both alive. That's reason enough. The translator repeated his words, and Luma's eyes softened. Where I come from, she said. We believe courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting while the fear is still in you. You have that courage. Tom didn't know how to answer that, so he busied himself checking the entrance. The shimmer they had seen earlier didn't appear again. But the forest felt. Watch. Luma leaned back, her voice quieter now. If They find us, they will not stop. They will burn the forest if they must. You could walk away now, and they would not follow you." Tom turned to face her. "And leave you here alone? Not a chance." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Luma said softly, "Perhaps humans are not as I was told." Tom gave a small smile. "Maybe we'll surprise each other." They shared a simple meal of dried fruit and water from Tom's pack. It wasn't much, but Luma accepted it gratefully. She asked about the valley, about the stars she could see from here, and about why Tom chose to live alone. In turn, Tom asked about her world, though she answered carefully, avoiding details that might put him in danger if he knew too much. Outside, the day passed quietly, but the sense of being hunted never left them. As the sun dipped again, Tom prepared a plan for the night. "If they get close," he told her, "we'll use the caves to move around them. They won't know the paths like I do." Luma's gaze was steady. "Then I will follow your lead." For the first time since they met, Tom felt they weren't just two strangers thrown together by chance. They were partners now, tied by the same danger and the same resolve. Somewhere far off, the deep hum returned, drifting faintly over the hills. Luma's eyes narrowed, and Tom felt the same quiet determination settle in his chest. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. And if the hunters thought Earth was a place they could walk into without resistance, they were about to learn something new. The night in the hidden cave was heavy with silence. Even the forest outside seemed to be holding its breath. Tom sat near the narrow entrance, a small rock in his hand, tracing its edge without thinking. Luma sat farther back, resting against the wall. Her eyes were half closed, but he knew she wasn't asleep. She listened to every sound like a person waiting for news they didn't want to hear. The faint hum they had heard in the distance earlier was gone now, but Tom didn't feel safer. In fact, the stillness made him uneasy. Sometimes danger was loud, sometimes it was silent and patient. A thin breeze slipped into the cave and carried with it a strange scent, not smoke, not the clean smell of pine, but something metallic, like iron and rain. Tom noticed Luma's eyes snap open at the same time. She looked toward the entrance, her shoulders tensing. "They are close," she said through the translator, her voice low. Tom leaned forward, peering through the gap between the rocks. Moonlight washed the forest in silver, and at first he saw nothing. Then, near the base of the hill, movement slow, deliberate, almost as smooth. The shimmer they had seen before was back, but now there were more than one. 3, maybe 4 shapes, slipping between the trees like shadows that had learned to walk. "They're fanning out," Tom whispered. Luma nodded. "They search by heat and by sound. The cave blocks some, but not all. We must make it harder for them." Tom's mind worked fast. "There's a ridge path behind this cave. If we move quietly, we can get to another opening farther up. They'll waste time searching here." She started to rise, but he held up a hand. "Wait." He pulled his jacket from his pack and set it near the cave mouth. "This will still carry my warmth for a while. It might trick their sensors." Luma gave a faint smile. "You think like a hunter." They slipped into the narrow back tunnel of the cave, Tom leading the way. The air was cool and damp, the walls brushing their shoulders. Their footsteps were almost silent on the packed earth. Somewhere above, water dripped, the sound echoing softly. The tunnel curved and ended at a small exit hidden behind a curtain of roots. Tom pushed them aside carefully and looked out. The ridge was steep but passable, and the moonlight lit a thin path between boulders. Below, the shimmer of the hunters was closer now, gathering near the first cave. "They took the bait," Tom whispered. They moved along the ridge, keeping low. Luma's steps were careful, but her injury made her slower. Tom adjusted his pace, staying close in case she stumbled. Every now and then, he glanced back. The hunters hadn't noticed them yet, but he could see one of the shapes moving toward the cave entrance. When they reached the second opening, Tom led Luma inside. This cave was smaller, with a narrow slit in the wall that gave them a view of the forest below. From here, they could see the hunters more clearly. Their shapes were vaguely human, but their bodies seemed to bend and flow like liquid metal, shifting with every step. They moved with a strange grace, scanning the ground and the trees with instruments that glowed faintly. Luma leaned close to the slit, her face tightening. "They will not stop," she said. "If they lose the trail here, they will burn the forest to drive us out." Tom's jaw tightened. "Then we need to make them leave before they try that." He thought about the supplies they had, a small flashlight, some rope, his pocket knife, and the broken shards of Luma's craft still lying in the hollow where it had crashed. "If we could reach your ship," he said, "could we use anything from it?" She hesitated. "There are energy cells inside. If damaged in the right way, they release a light and sound strong enough to blind and disorient. But they are unstable, dangerous." Tom's lips curved in a determined half smile. "Sounds perfect." The plan was risky, but they didn't have much choice. They waited until the hunters began to spread out again, then slipped back onto the ridge path. Moving in the opposite direction from the crash site would only delay them, so instead, they looped around, staying in the shadow of the rocks until they were behind the search pattern. The forest floor was damp, muffling their steps. Tom led, clearing branches with slow, careful motions. Luma followed close, her breathing steady despite her wound. When they finally reached the hollow, the glow from the ship's seams had faded to almost nothing. Tom climbed inside through the same torn opening he had found on the first night. The air inside smelled faintly of burned metal. Luma pointed to a small panel, its surface cracked. "2 cells here," she said. "Strike them together hard, then run." Tom pulled them free, feeling their strange, faint vibration. "How long?" he asked. "Seconds," she said. They didn't waste time. Tom placed the cells near the path where the hunters were likely to pass. Then they moved quickly into the trees. They had just reached a patch of thick ferns when the first hunter stepped into the hollow. Tom waited until it was almost at the cells, then hurled a small stone to hit the metal casing. The 2 cells clanged together with a sharp crack. The result was instant. A blinding white flash lit the hollow, throwing long shadows across the trees. A piercing, rising hum followed, shaking the air like a struck bell. The hunters froze, their shapes flickering and twisting as if struggling to hold their form. "Run," Tom hissed, and they did. They didn't stop until they were halfway back to the second cave. Tom glanced behind them and saw no shimmer, only the still, silver-lit forest. Either the hunters had retreated or they were still recovering from the blast dot inside the cave. They both sank to the ground, breathing hard. Luma looked at him for a long moment. "You risked yourself again," she said softly. Tom shook his head. "I'm just making sure we both live through this." She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. "You don't understand," she said. "To face them at all is more than most would do. To face them for someone not of your world, that is rare." Tom didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded. Outside, the forest was quiet again, but they both knew it wouldn't last. The hunters had been driven back, not defeated. For now, though, they had bought themselves time, and sometimes, in a fight like this, time was the most valuable thing of all. The cave felt warmer now, though no fire burned inside. Maybe it was the relief of having escaped the hunters for the night, or maybe it was simply exhaustion catching up with them. Tom sat near the entrance, listening to the steady rhythm of Luma's breathing. She was leaning against the wall, eyes closed, one hand resting lightly on her bandaged side. For hours, they stayed quiet, speaking only in short whispers when needed. Tom knew she was still in pain, but she didn't complain. There was a strange strength about her, not just the strength to fight, but the strength to endure. When the first gray light of dawn slipped through the cracks in the cave, Luma opened her eyes. She watched Tom for a moment, as if deciding something. Then, in a low voice, she said, "You should know the truth about my wound." Tom glanced at her, frowning. "You already told me shrapnel from the attack." Her expression was calm, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "Not just shrapnel. What is inside me is not only metal, it is a tracker." Tom straightened. "A tracker? You mean it can still lead them to you?" She nodded. "Yes, but it is not simple. The device inside is shielded, but damaged. When you touched it the first night, you pressed in a way that slowed its signal. That is why they have not already found us. But it is temporary. Tom's mind raced. So, what do we do? Can it be removed? Luma hesitated before answering. It can, but it will not be easy. The shard is deep, and removing it will hurt if done wrong. It will release a signal brighter than anything they can ignore. They will come at once. Tom looked at her seriously, and if we leave it, then they will keep searching. Sooner or later, they will follow the signal to this planet, and they will not stop at me. Her words were heavy, and Tom understood their weight. If they found her here, they might harm anyone nearby, anyone in the valley, maybe even beyond. He rubbed his forehead. Then we take it out. We just need to make sure we're ready when we do it. Luma studied him for a moment. You speak as if you were part of this fight. I am, he said simply. You came here hurt. You needed help. That makes it my fight too. Something in her face softened, and she gave a small nod. Then I will trust you. They spent the next few hours making preparations. Tom checked his supplies: water, clean cloth, the small knife he carried, and a coil of rope. He didn't have the tools a doctor would, but he had steady hands and a stubborn heart. Luma instructed him on where the shard was likely lodged and how to remove it without damaging the surrounding tissue. Her calm explanations made it clear she had seen battlefield injuries before. By midday, they had chosen a small hollow near the back of the cave. The ground there was flat and covered with dry sand, easy to clean. Light filtered in faintly from a crack above, just enough for Tom to see without using the flashlight for too long. Luma lay back against her folded jacket, breathing slowly. When you begin, she said, you must not stop until it is out. If you hesitate, it will be worse. Tom met her gaze. I won't stop. He cleaned the blade of his knife with water, then heated it slightly over a small flame from his lighter to kill anything that could cause infection. His heart was steady, but his hands felt warm with tension. Luma closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Do it? Tom worked carefully, cutting away the old bandage and cleaning the wound. The shard glinted faintly beneath the torn flesh, not like any metal he had seen before. It had a dull silver color, but it seemed to shift slightly as the light touched it, almost as if it were alive. He made a small incision, just enough to expose the shard. Luma's breath hissed between her teeth, but she didn't cry out. Her eyes stayed locked on his face, watching him as he worked. When the shard came loose, Tom could feel it vibrating faintly in his fingers. The moment it left her body, the faint hum returned in the distance, slow. But they will hear that, Luma said through clenched teeth. Tom didn't waste time. He wrapped the shard tightly in layers of cloth, then slipped it into a small pouch and tied it shut. If they can track it, let's make sure they track it somewhere far from here, he said. Luma's lips curved faintly, even through the pain. You have a hunter's mind. He quickly cleaned and dressed the wound with fresh cloth, making sure it was tight enough to stop the bleeding, but not so tight as to cut off her breath. She exhaled slowly, her face pale but her eyes clear. Tom helped her sit up and handed her the water bottle. She took a sip, then leaned against the wall. Resting? I can walk, she said after a moment. Good, Tom replied. Because we need to move fast. They left the cave, Tom carrying the wrapped shard in the pouch. The plan was simple: lead the hunters away. There was a narrow ravine to the east that stretched for miles. If they could drop the shard far enough away, it might buy them the time they needed. The walk was slow at first. Luma was still weak, but she didn't complain. She kept her gaze sharp, scanning the trees. The afternoon light turned golden as they moved, and shadows stretched long across the forest floor. They reached the ravine just before sunset. The air was cooler here, and the sound of running water echoed off the stone walls. Tom climbed down a short slope and found a spot where the current ran fast. Without hesitation, he hurled the pouch into the water. It vanished instantly, swept away toward the distant lowlands. They stood there for a moment, listening. The forest was quiet again, but both of them knew the silence wouldn't last. The hunters would find the signal eventually, but when they did, it would be far from here. Luma looked at Tom, her voice low but steady. You may have just saved this world. Tom shook his head. We saved it, together. As they turned back toward the hills, the first stars began to appear in the sky. Somewhere out there, danger still waited. But for now, they had taken the first real step toward ending it, and Tom knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the same stubborn courage that had led him to her crash site. In the first place, the night air in the hills was sharp and cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Tom and Luma moved quietly along a narrow deer trail, the moon casting silver light over the trees. The Shar was gone, carried far away by the river, but they both knew the hunters would still search. They will be angry now. Luma said softly through the translator. They will know the signal was moved. They will understand it was a trick. Tom glanced at her. Then they'll come looking for the people who tricked them. She nodded once. Her expression calm but serious. We must prepare before they find us again. They reached a small clearing near the edge of a steep drop. Below, the forest stretched for miles. Tom had hunted here before in quieter days. It was a place full of natural cover, hidden paths, and choke points. If they were going to stand against the hunters, this was the best ground to do it. This is where we make our stand, Tom said. Luma studied the terrain, then turned to him. What do you need? Tom's mind worked quickly. We need noise, light, and confusion, and we need to slow them down. They spent the next hour gathering what they could. Tom used fallen branches, vines, and stones to create trip lines hidden under leaves. Luma worked beside him, showing him how to sharpen pieces of her ship's broken metal into reflective shards. When light hits these, she explained, it will scatter, confusing their sensors. Tom placed the shards in small piles along the paths the hunters might take, each one angled to catch the moonlight. He also tied thin strips of metal to low branches so they would clink and rattle in the wind, masking the sound of their movements. By the time they finished, the clearing was a web of small traps and distractions. Luma stepped back and looked round. It will not stop them, she said, but it will make them slow. That may be enough. Tom gave a small smile. Sometimes slowing someone down is all you need. They took positions at opposite ends of the clearing, hidden behind thick trees. Tom had his flashlight ready, its beam narrow and sharp. Luma held a small device from her belt, something she had taken from her ship before they left the crash site. This will send out a short pulse of energy, she told him. It will overload their senses for a few seconds. But I can only use it once. The forest stayed quiet for a while. Tom's heartbeat slowed into a steady rhythm, his breathing deep and controlled. Then, faintly, he heard the low hum that had haunted them for days. Luma heard it too. She crouched lower, her eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. The first shimmer appeared on the far side of the clearing, slipping between the trunks like water flowing uphill. Two more followed, moving with inhuman precision. Their shapes shifted as they walked, their edges blurring, as if the night itself was bending around them. Tom's grip tightened on the flashlight. He waited until the first hunter stepped into the clearing, then flicked it on, aiming the beam directly at the reflective shards they had scattered. The light bounced and danced wildly, flashing in all directions. The hunters slowed, their movements jerky as their sensors tried to adjust. Luma pressed a button on her device. A pulse of invisible energy swept through the clearing. Tom felt it in his chest, a deep vibration that rattled his bones. The hunters staggered, their shimmering forms flickering like bad signals on old television. Now, Luma called. Tom triggered the first trap. A thin vine pulled loose, dropping a cluster of stones into the path. The hunters stepped on them, slipping slightly. The sound of the stones echoed in the clearing, masking Tom's footsteps as he moved to another position. Luma fired a small burst of light from her device, bright, but not blinding, straight at the second hunter. It reeled back, its shape collapsing for a moment before reforming. The third hunter tried to flank them, but its foot caught on one of the trip lines Tom had set. A branch snapped upward, releasing another shower of reflective shards into its path. The creature froze, its head tilting as if recalculating its next move. They are learning, Luma warned. Tom knew she was right. These weren't mindless machines, they were hunters, intelligent and adaptable. The traps were buying time, but not much. back to the ridge," Tom shouted. They moved quickly, slipping through a narrow gap between two large rocks. Behind them, the hunters pushed into the clearing, their shimmering bodies catching the moonlight in strange patterns at the ridge. Tom stopped and looked down. Below was a drop of nearly 20 feet into a bed of thick ferns. "We jump," he said. Luma glanced at the edge, then at him. "You first." Tom leapt, landing hard but safe in the soft plants below. Luma followed, her movement light despite her wound. They scrambled up the opposite slope, vanishing into the shadows of the next stand of trees. When they finally stopped, the hum had faded. The hunters had not followed them down the ridge, at least not yet. Tom leaned against a tree, catching his breath. "We slowed them. That's something." Luma nodded. "They will search again. But tonight, we kept them from finding us." There was no smile on her face, but there was something else. Respect. "You fight like one who has hunted all his life," she said. "You see the ground, you see the enemy, and you use both." Tom shrugged. "You survive long enough in a place like this, you learn to read the land." They found another small hollow to rest in for the night. Tom kept watch for the first few hours, listening for the hum, but it never came back. When he finally let himself rest, he lay down knowing the fight wasn't over, but also knowing they could win it if they stayed ahead. Somewhere out in the forest, the hunters were regrouping, but now they had learned something new. On this world, prey could fight back. The morning sun rose pale and cold over the hills, turning the mist in the valleys into silver threads. Tom sat on a flat rock at the edge of their small hollow, sharpening his pocket knife out of habit more than need. Luma was awake too, sitting cross-legged with her eyes half closed, as if listening to something far away. "They are still here," she said quietly through the translator. "Farther than last night, but moving closer again." Tom nodded. He had expected this. The hunters had been slowed, but not stopped. They were patient, clever, and determined. Sooner or later, they would catch up, unless he and Luma stopped running. He looked at her and spoke plainly. "We can't keep hiding forever. If we want this to end, we have to finish it." Her gaze lifted to meet his. "You mean to fight them directly?" "Yes, but not in the forest. We picked the ground. Somewhere we can control everything they see, hear, and touch." Luma considered this for a long moment. Then she said, "There is a way. In my ship's memory core, there is a signal beacon. If I trigger it, it will send out a false distress call, one strong enough to pull them all to a single place. We could choose where that place is." Tom's jaw tightened, and then she met his eyes without flinching. "And then we make sure they do not leave." It was dangerous. It was final. But it was also the only chance they had to end the chase. By midday, they were moving again, heading toward the hollow where her broken craft still lay. The journey was slow because of her injury, but Luma's pace was steady. They avoided open ground, keeping to shadows and thick undergrowth. Once they heard the faint hum again, closer this time, but it faded after a few minutes. When they reached the crash site, the silver curve of the ship still gleamed faintly under the filtered light. The air smelled of old metal and scorched earth. Luma climbed inside, her movements practiced despite her wound. She returned with a small, rectangular device no bigger than Tom's hand. Its surface shimmered faintly, and lights pulsed along its edges. "This will bring them," she said. "We must be ready before I switch it on." Tom had already chosen the place, a deep ravine a short distance from the crash. It had steep rock walls on either side, with only one narrow entrance. If they could lure the hunters inside, there would be no easy way out. They spent the afternoon setting the ground. Tom wove vines across the path at ankle height, hidden under leaves. He piled loose rocks in high pockets along the cliff walls, balanced so they could be pushed down at the right moment. Luma placed pieces of her ship's broken hull in patterns that would reflect and scatter any sensor signals. By the time the sun began to sink, everything was ready. They took positions on a ledge above the ravine, hidden by thick brush. From here, they could see the entrance and most of the rocky floor below. Luma held the beacon in her hands. "Once I start it, they will come fast," she warned. Tom nodded. "Then let's not waste any more time." She pressed a sequence on the device. A faint hum began, low at first, then rising into a steady pulse that seemed to make the air tremble. Tom couldn't hear any words, but he felt it in his bones. A call meant for something not human. Minutes passed. The forest seemed to grow still, as if waiting. Then, far down the slope, the shimmer appeared. 1, 2, 3. More than he could count at first. The hunters were coming in a slow, steady line. Drawn toward the beacon like moths to a flame, they moved into the ravine without hesitation, their shifting forms slipping over rocks and around fallen branches. When the last one entered, Tom gave Luma a quick nod. She triggered the first trap. A vine snapped, sending a cascade of sharp metal shards tumbling into the ravine. They clattered against the rocks, filling the air with unpredictable flashes of light. The hunters froze, their shapes flickering as their sensors tried to adjust. Tom pushed against a wedge of stone, sending the first pile of rocks crashing down. The sound echoed like thunder, and dust filled the air. A few hunters were knocked sideways, their bodies distorting as they struggled to keep form. Luma activated a second device, this one sending a short, sharp burst of energy. The hunters nearest to it staggered, their edges warping as if heat were twisting them out of shape. But they recovered faster than Tom expected. 2 of them began climbing the walls of the ravine, their limbs stretching unnaturally. Now, Tom shouted. Luma hurled the beacon to the center of the ravine. As soon as it hit the ground, she pressed another button. The device began to glow brighter and brighter, the hum rising into a piercing tone. "They will not leave that signal," she said. "When it overloads, it will burn out their sensors for good." Tom knew what that meant. They had to be gone before it reached full power. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the far end of the ledge. They scrambled along the rocks, slipping into a narrow side path just as the beacon reached its peak. The light that followed was blinding, even from behind the stone. The sound was like a wave breaking over them, rattling the ground. For a moment, Tom felt the air grow heavy, as if the world itself was holding still. When it faded, the forest was silent. They waited for a long minute before stepping back to the ledge. Below, the ravine was littered with still, shapeless pools of dull metal. The hunters' forms were gone, their shimmering movement ended. The beacon lay dark and cold at the center, its work finished. Luma stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the scene. "It is done," she said quietly. Tom let out a slow breath. "Then it's over." They made their way back through the forest in the fading light. By the time they reached the higher ridge, the first stars were appearing overhead. Luma paused, looking up at them. "My people will come for me now," she said. "When they do, I will tell them of this place, and of the human who fought beside me." Tom gave a small smile. "Just tell them we look after our guests." For a while, they stood in silence, the wind moving gently through the trees. The danger had passed, but Tom knew the memory of it would stay. Not just the fear, but the moments of courage that had brought them through. When Luma finally left, she did so with a promise that she would return when the stars brought her path near this world again.